I'm sorry. I know this sounds crazy, but I think I grabbed your life by mistake. Tallis Monroe stood in the hotel lobby at midnight, holding a black suitcase that wasn't hers, staring at the man who just knocked on her door. He was tall, exhausted-looking, his tie loosened, his eyes holding something she couldn't quite name. Grief, maybe, or resignation. "It's just a suitcase," he said, quietly, though his voice caught slightly. "These things happen." "But there were letters inside," Tallis whispered, her eyes glistening. "I didn't mean to read them, but one fell out, and I'm so sorry about your wife." The man, Brennan Carver, the luggage tag had read, went completely still. The lobby lights hummed softly above them. Somewhere a clock ticked. "You read Elise's letters," he said finally. Not angry, just broken. "Only one," Tallis said, tears spilling over. "The one where you told her it was okay to live again. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "No," Brennan interrupted, his voice thick. Maybe you were supposed to." And in that moment, two strangers carrying invisible wounds stood facing each other, connected by a mistake that felt strangely like fate. It had started 6 hours earlier at Denver International Airport. Tallis, 25 and returning from her grandmother's funeral, had been moving through the terminal in a fog of grief. She'd grabbed her black suitcase from baggage claim without really looking, desperate to get to her hotel and finally fall apart in private. Brennan Carver, 33 and CEO of Carver Technologies, had been returning from a business trip he'd scheduled specifically to avoid the 3rd anniversary of his wife's death. He'd noticed the wrong suitcase only when he reached his penthouse and opened it to find women's clothes and a worn journal instead of his belongings. Inside his actual suitcase, the one Tallis now had, were the letters. 52 of them, one for each week of the year following Elise's death from cancer. She'd written them in her final months, knowing he'd need them, knowing he'd try to drown in work rather than feel. And now a stranger had read one. They sat in the hotel's empty bar, their switched suitcases between them, neither quite ready to make the exchange and disappear back into their separate lives. "I wasn't trying to invade your privacy," Tallis said softly, clutching her cold coffee. "But when I saw it, my dearest Brennan, by now you've stopped crying and started working yourself to death. I related to it." Brennan looked at her carefully, really seeing her for the first time. Red-rimmed eyes, a black dress, the heaviness of someone who just said goodbye. "Who did you lose?" he asked gently. "My grandmother. She raised me. She was everything. And before she died, she made me promise I wouldn't shut down, that I'd stay open to life, to people, to possibility." Her voice cracked. "But I don't know how to do that when everything hurts." Brennan felt something shift in his chest. Recognition. "Elise made me promise the same thing 3 years ago, and I've broken that promise every day since." They sat in silence, two people who'd become experts at surviving, but had forgotten how to live. "The letter you read," Brennan said finally. "What else did it say?" Tallis hesitated, then recited softly from memory. She said, "My dearest Brennan, by now you've stopped crying and started working yourself to death." She said, "Love isn't something we run out of. It's not disloyal to live fully, to laugh genuinely, to let someone new in. I'm not in your past, Brennan. I'm in every good thing you'll ever do. So please, do good things." Brennan's breath hitched. He'd read that letter dozens of times, but hearing it in a stranger's voice, tender, aching, understanding, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I've built 3 new divisions, launched 5 products, doubled our revenue, but I haven't done a single good thing that mattered. Not really." "That's not true," Tallis said firmly. "You kept her letters. You honored her by carrying them with you. That matters." "Does it?" Brennan looked at her with raw honesty. "Or am I just hiding behind grief because it's easier than risking my heart again?" The question hung between them, unanswered, because Tallis was asking herself the same thing. They spent that night talking, really talking, in a way neither had with anyone in years. Brennan learned about Tallis's work as a music therapist, her dream of opening a grief support center, her fear that she'd never feel whole again. Tallis learned about Brennan's rise from nothing, his devotion to Elise, his terror that loving again would somehow erase what they had. As dawn approached, Brennan said something that changed everything. "My company has a foundation. We fund healthcare initiatives mostly, but I've been looking for something more personal, more human." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What if we funded your grief center, not as charity, as a partnership? You bring the heart, I bring the resources, and together we create something that helps people like us." Tallis stared at him, stunned. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "Because," Brennan said, his voice gentle but certain, "you read the most private thing I own, and instead of turning away from my pain, you sat with it. You understood. And I think Elise was right. Good things happen when we stop hiding." Tears streamed down Tallis's face. "I'm scared. What if I'm not ready? What if I fail?" "Then we'll fail together and try again. That's what people do when they stop going through life alone." 8 months later, the Elise Carver Memorial Center opened its doors. It wasn't just a grief support facility. It was a place of music, art, connection, and healing. Tallis ran the programs, pouring her heart into every family that walked through the doors. Brennan showed up every week, no longer hiding behind conference calls and boardrooms, finally engaging with the messy, beautiful reality of human connection. They didn't fall in love, not in the traditional sense, but they built something deeper, a friendship forged in shared loss and mutual understanding, a partnership that honored their pasts while embracing possibility. One evening, as they watched a support group gathering in the center's music room, Brennan turned to Tallis. "I read something once, that the universe sends us what we need, disguised as what we don't want. I didn't want my suitcase to get mixed up that night. I didn't want a stranger to read Elise's words." "But," Tallis prompted gently, "but I needed someone to remind me that carrying love doesn't mean carrying grief alone." He smiled, the first genuinely peaceful expression she'd seen on his face. "Thank you for grabbing the wrong suitcase." Tallis laughed through her tears. "Thank you for knocking on my door." They stood together watching people who were hurting find comfort in community, and understood something profound. Sometimes the wrong thing leads us exactly where we're meant to be. "Your grandmother would be proud," Brennan said softly. "So would Elise," Tallis replied. And in that shared acknowledgement, two people who'd lost everything learned that kindness is the bridge between grief and hope. And sometimes it all takes one stranger brave enough to cross it. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, subscribe, and comment.